I used to believe that respect was something you earned quietly, the way a child earns a gold star by behaving well. I thought if I stayed helpful, stayed agreeable, stayed small enough not to inconvenience anyone, eventually they would look at me and see value. For years, I convinced myself that the subtle dismissals were misunderstandings, that the jokes at my expense were harmless, that being overlooked was simply my role in the family. But the moment I realized they never respected me didn't come from something loud. It came from something small, and it broke something in me I didn't know could break. It happened on a Thursday night at my sister Lauren's house. She had invited everyone over for dinner, the kind where she performs generosity like it's a talent show. I arrived early, like I always did, to help her set the table and keep the peace. My nephew Caleb was sitting at the kitchen counter with his homework spread in front of him. He was only 9, small for his age, with nervous eyes that always searched the room before he spoke, like he was checking if it was safe. Lauren was in one of her moods, the kind where every word from Caleb was an irritation. He was struggling with a math problem, his pencil hovering over the page, eraser worn down to nothing. He whispered that he didn't understand it. She snapped immediately, telling him he should have paid attention in school, that she wasn't going to spoon-feed him stupidity. The word stupidity landed heavier than she intended, but not heavier than it should have. I felt something tighten in my chest. Caleb's shoulders folded inward. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He just nodded like he agreed with her assessment of himself. That was the part that hurt the most. He believed her. I stepped in carefully, keeping my voice calm. I told him math could be confusing, that it wasn't about being smart or dumb, that sometimes it just needed to be explained differently. I pulled up a chair beside him and started breaking the problem down into smaller pieces. His face changed slowly. The fear drained first, then the doubt, and then, quietly, understanding bloomed. When he got the answer right, he looked up at me with this fragile kind of pride, like he was testing whether he was allowed to feel it. That look undid me, because it wasn't just relief. It was gratitude. Gratitude for basic patience, for kindness, for being treated like he mattered. And in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach drop. He wasn't used to it. Lauren watched from the sink, arms crossed, unimpressed. She muttered that I was making him soft, that the world wouldn't coddle him. I tried to keep things light, said kids grow stronger when they feel supported. She laughed at that. Not a real laugh, the kind that says you're naive. Then she said it. She said I wouldn't understand because I didn't have the discipline to raise a child. She said I was always too sensitive, too emotional, too weak to handle reality. She didn't say it in anger. She said it casually, like it was a known fact. And that's when I saw it clearly. She didn't value my perspective. She didn't see my compassion as strength. She saw it as deficiency. All those years of me mediating arguments, helping with bills when she was short, babysitting Caleb without being asked twice, listening to her vent about her failing relationships. None of it translated to respect in her eyes. It translated to usefulness. There's a difference. Respect acknowledges your character. Usefulness exploits it. As I sat there beside Caleb, I felt the weight of every family gathering where my opinions were brushed aside. Every time my career choices were mocked as impractical, every holiday where my seat at the table felt more like a folding chair brought out as an afterthought. I had mistaken tolerance for acceptance. I had mistaken proximity for appreciation. Caleb finished his homework and quietly slid off the stool. Before running to his room, he hugged me around the waist. It was quick, almost secretive, like he didn't want his mother to see, but I saw the way he held on for half a second longer than necessary. Like he was memorizing what it felt like to be supported. Empathy flooded through me, not just for him but for the child I used to be. The kid who tried to earn love by being agreeable. The one who thought silence was safer than speaking up. I saw how cycles repeat when no one interrupts them. Lauren clattered dishes louder than needed, clearly irritated that I had stepped into her parenting. She said I was undermining her authority. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her authority without kindness is just fear dressed up as control. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at Caleb's closed bedroom door. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt protective. That night, driving home, I replayed everything in my mind. The way Lauren dismissed me so effortlessly. The way Caleb shrank so instinctively. The way I had spent years shrinking alongside him, thinking that endurance was the same as dignity. It wasn't. The moment I realized they never respected me wasn't about a single insult. It was about a pattern finally becoming undeniable. It was about understanding that empathy in a house that worships dominance is seen as rebellion. And the scariest part wasn't that she disrespected me. It was realizing that if I kept staying quiet, Caleb would learn that being kind makes you weak. That night, I made a decision I wasn't ready to admit out loud. Because the next time Lauren tried to belittle him in front of me, I wasn't going to stay silent. And I knew she wasn't going to like what happened next. Anger doesn't arrive all at once. It builds quietly, stacking itself in the corners of your chest, until one day there's no more room left for patience. For years, I had convinced myself that Lauren's sharp tongue was just her personality, that her condescension was stress, that her constant corrections were concern disguised poorly. But the truth was far uglier than I wanted to admit. She didn't just misunderstand me, she diminished me. And she did it with precision. The next time it happened, it wasn't subtle. We were at our parents' house for Sunday dinner. The entire family was gathered around the table, plates clinking, polite laughter filling the air. I had recently started a new position at work, something I was proud of, something I had fought hard to earn. When our mother asked how it was going, I started explaining the project I was leading. I spoke carefully, confidently, finally allowing myself to take up space. Lauren interrupted me halfway through my sentence. She laughed and said I always made things sound more important than they were. She told everyone that I had a habit of exaggerating, that I liked to feel significant even when I wasn't. She said it lightly, like a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a dismissal dressed in humor. Everyone chuckled. That was the sound that changed everything. Not her words, not her smirk. The laughter. Because in that moment, I saw it clearly. She felt entitled to undermine me publicly. And no one thought it was unusual. It was normal. It was expected. It was my role to be the punchline. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I tried to continue speaking, but she cut in again, correcting details that didn't need correcting, reframing my achievements as accidents. She spoke over me like I wasn't even sitting there, like my voice was background noise. And suddenly, I wasn't angry just at her. I was angry at myself. Angry for every time I let it slide. Angry for every polite smile I forced while she chipped away at my credibility. Angry that I had mistaken endurance for maturity. I had told myself that rising above it made me stronger. But rising above constant disrespect doesn't make you noble. It makes you complicit in your own erasure. Lauren leaned back in her chair, satisfied. She had reclaimed the spotlight. That was always her goal. Control the narrative. Control the perception. Control the room. I looked around the table and realized something painful. No one expected me to push back. They expected me to absorb it. That expectation lit something in me I had never allowed before. When she made another comment about how I was too sensitive to handle real pressure, I didn't swallow it. I didn't deflect. I didn't laugh along. I asked her why she felt the need to discredit me every time I spoke. The table went silent. She blinked, surprised. She tried to brush it off, said I was overreacting, that I couldn't take a joke, that I was proving her point, but I didn't retreat. I told her calmly that jokes are funny to everyone involved. I told her that what she did wasn't humor, it was habit. A habit of making herself feel taller by shrinking me. A habit of confusing dominance with strength. Her face hardened. She accused me of attacking her. She said I was ungrateful for everything she had done for me over the years. There it was again. The scorekeeping. The idea that because she had helped me occasionally, she owned the right to belittle me indefinitely. The anger inside me sharpened. I told her that support isn't a loan you collect interest on through humiliation. I told her that respect isn't optional just because we share DNA. I told her that I was done playing the role she assigned me. For a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression. Not guilt. Fear. Because the dynamic had shifted. She was used to my silence. She relied on it. My quiet acceptance allowed her to maintain control without resistance. But the moment I named her behavior, it lost some of its power. She tried one last tactic. She said I was being dramatic, that I was making a scene, that I always found a way to turn things into a conflict. And that's when it finally clicked. Calling out disrespect is never what creates the conflict. The disrespect does. I had spent years trying to be the bigger person. But being the bigger person in a one-sided power struggle just means giving the other person more room to step on you. That day, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I didn't retaliate with cruelty. I just refused to shrink. And somehow, that felt more threatening to her than anything else I could have done. The anger I felt wasn't explosive. It was clarifying. It burned away illusion. It showed me that her behavior wasn't accidental. It was patterned, intentional, reinforced by years of my compliance. As dinner ended, the atmosphere remained tense. Conversations were stiff. Eyes avoided mine. I knew they were thinking I had changed. They were right, because the fire that started that night wasn't going to go out. And Lauren had no idea how much of her power depended on the version of me that no longer existed. Sadness didn't hit me in the middle of the argument. It didn't arrive when Lauren's voice sharpened or when the room fell silent. It came later, when I was alone in my apartment, sitting on the edge of my bed with the lights off, replaying every memory I had tried to rewrite in my favor. Anger had given me clarity, but sadness gave me truth. Because once the fire cools down, you're left with the ashes. I kept thinking about how long it had taken me to speak up. Years. Not months. Not one or two isolated incidents. Years of subtle dismissals, public corrections, eye rolls, interrupted sentences, patronizing advice I never asked for. I had built an entire identity around being the understanding one, the patient one, the one who kept the peace. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if that identity had ever been respected, or if it had just been convenient. That realization felt heavier than any insult Lauren had thrown at me. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hands trembling slightly, not because I regretted what I said. I didn't. But because I was beginning to understand the cost of what I had tolerated. There's a particular kind of grief that comes with recognizing you've allowed yourself to be diminished. It's not just sadness toward others. It's sadness toward yourself. I thought about the child I used to be. The one who avoided conflict because loud voices made my chest tighten. The one who learned early that approval was earned through compliance. I had always told myself that I was naturally easygoing. But what if I wasn't easygoing? What if I was just afraid of rejection? The more I thought about it, the more patterns surfaced. Family gatherings where my ideas were brushed aside until someone else repeated them louder. Career milestones that were met with skepticism instead of celebration. Personal boundaries treated like suggestions instead of limits. I had explained it all away. Told myself that Lauren was strong-willed. That I was simply more sensitive. That this dynamic was normal between siblings. But normal doesn't mean healthy. The sadness deepened when I realized something even harder to face. They didn't expect me to leave. Not physically. Emotionally. They assumed I would always come back to the table. Always accept the joke. Always smooth things over. My role wasn't just tolerated. It was required. And the moment I stepped out of it, I became the problem. That hurt more than I expected. Because I had spent years believing that my loyalty meant something. I thought about Caleb again. About the way he had hugged me quietly, like kindness was a secret transaction. The thought made my throat tighten. What kind of environment teaches a child that compassion has to be hidden? What kind of system punishes softness so consistently that even love feels risky? I sat back down on the bed and let the silence stretch. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the loneliness I had been avoiding. When you start setting boundaries, you don't just lose conflict. You lose familiarity. You lose the illusion of harmony. You lose the comfort of knowing your role. I wondered if Lauren would call. Part of me hoped she would, not to argue, but to reflect, to acknowledge, to meet me halfway. But another part of me knew that would require her to question herself. And people who build their identity around control rarely volunteer for self-examination. That thought didn't make me angry. It made me tired. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from realizing you've been overextending yourself emotionally for people who never intended to reciprocate. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's the slow sinking understanding that you were pouring from a cup no one cared to refill. I started questioning everything. Was I too sensitive? Too reactive? Had I misinterpreted years of teasing as disrespect? But the more I replayed the conversations in my head, the clearer it became. Respect doesn't require constant defense. If you have to repeatedly justify your worth in a room, that room was never honoring it to begin with. Tears came, unexpectedly soft. Not because I wanted to return to the old dynamic, but because I mourned the version of myself who believed things would change without confrontation. I mourned the hope that patience alone could teach people how to treat you. I mourned the time lost, trying to earn validation from someone who had already decided I was beneath her. The sadness wasn't about Lauren winning or losing. It was about me waking up. And waking up can feel brutal when you realize how long you've been asleep. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of acceptance settle over me. If they never respected me, then I had a choice to make. I could continue fighting for acknowledgement that might never come. Or I could start building a life where my voice wasn't optional. But that choice meant something terrifying. It meant change. And change doesn't just shift relationships. It exposes them. Because the next time I saw Lauren, it wouldn't just be about anger or sadness. It would be about whether she could even recognize the person I was becoming. Surprise doesn't always look like shock. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like watching someone unravel in front of you because you've quietly removed the version of yourself they depended on. The final moment of disbelief didn't happen when I raised my voice. It happened when I didn't. 2 weeks after that dinner, Lauren called and invited me over again. Her tone was neutral, almost rehearsed. She didn't mention our argument. She didn't apologize. She acted as if nothing significant had happened. That alone told me everything I needed to know. In her world, conflict only exists if I validate it. If I move on without submission, she reframes the narrative. But I went. Not because I was ready to reconcile. Not because I wanted to smooth things over. I went because I needed clarity. I needed to see whether anything had shifted, or if the only change was happening inside me. When I walked into her house, everything looked the same. The same carefully arranged furniture. The same faint tension in the air. Caleb was at the table drawing quietly. He looked up and smiled at me in a way that felt both warm and cautious. Lauren started small talk immediately, asking about work in a tone that sounded interested but felt investigative. I answered briefly. No over-explaining. No embellishing. No attempts to justify the importance of my role. Just facts. She seemed unsettled by that. Throughout dinner, she tried several subtle jabs. Comments about how I had always been dramatic growing up. Little references to how some people take things too personally. Each one designed to pull me back into defending myself. And for the first time in my life, I didn't take the bait. I didn't clarify. I didn't argue. I didn't try to prove that I was reasonable. I simply let her words sit in the air without reaction. That's when I saw it. Confusion. Lauren wasn't prepared for indifference. She knew how to spar with defensiveness. She knew how to overpower emotion. But she didn't know what to do with someone who no longer needed her approval. The surprise on her face wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. Her sentences grew shorter. Her tone lost confidence. She repeated herself, almost as if waiting for me to challenge her. When I didn't, the energy shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. For years, I thought she was stronger than me. But strength that depends on someone else shrinking isn't strength. It's imbalance. At one point, she made a comment about how I used to need her guidance to make decisions. It was framed as nostalgia, but it carried the same old edge. I looked at her calmly and said that I appreciated the help she offered in the past, but I trusted myself now. That was it. No accusation. No sarcasm. No raised voice. Just certainty. And something cracked. She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was speaking as. Because she didn't. The version of me she understood was the one who apologized for existing too loudly. The one who explained every choice in hopes of avoiding criticism. The one who believed respect could be negotiated through compliance. But that version was gone. The disbelief wasn't just hers. It was mine too. I was surprised by how peaceful I felt. I expected confrontation to be explosive. I expected fireworks. But the real shift felt quiet, almost anticlimactic. Like stepping out of a room you didn't realize was suffocating until you felt fresh air. Caleb dropped a crayon, and it rolled toward my chair. I picked it up and handed it back to him. He smiled again, this time without hesitation. And I realized something powerful. Children notice dynamics long before adults admit them. He was watching. Not just the tension. The change. Lauren attempted one final maneuver before I left. She said she hoped I wasn't going to hold grudges over silly misunderstandings. She framed it as maturity, as if forgiveness required forgetting, as if growth meant pretending nothing was wrong. I told her calmly that I wasn't holding a grudge. I was holding a boundary. The room went still. That word landed differently than anger ever had. Boundary. It didn't accuse. It didn't attack. It simply defined. And in that definition, I saw the disbelief settle into something else. Uncertainty. Because boundaries don't ask for permission. They don't beg for validation. They exist whether others agree with them or not. As I walked out of her house that night, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. The moment I realized they never respected me had once felt devastating. But the moment I stopped explaining myself felt transformative. Disbelief had turned into clarity. Surprise had turned into power. Not power over her, power over myself. I finally understood that respect isn't something you demand loudly. It's something you demonstrate by refusing to tolerate its absence. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for her to change. I had already changed.